Hey, welcome to the Levelin Up podcast with Brigham Blackham.
So when it comes to an idea, people often get excited about this one idea. And then when they start to explore it, that idea is like, master is if I go to talent A and I say, hey, you're really good at this thing. Can you give me your feedback on what it is? It's not me saying, this is your problem. This is me saying, okay, I understand that this is something I believe you can solve. You need to give me input if it is. But when I went up to the mic to ask, like, what can I do to not alienate my audience in horror? Because horror is like just a bookshelf of stuff. Like you've got aliens, you've got vampires, you've got slashers and stalkers.
Hey, welcome to the Levelin Up podcast with Brigham Blackham. I am your success story strategist, and today we are going to be talking about the monsters that are our ideas. The idea monster. This is a novel idea, and I'm so excited to talk about it with my friend, Tasha Wheelhouse. I was just on her podcast, and we had an amazing experience. She has such a unique take on her genre. She does this horror story, 1940s Foley artist type of soundscape that is so entertaining. If you are even a little bit remotely interested in horror, you need to go check her out because she's awesome. But we're going to have a great conversation. And she has another part of her life that's all about being a scrum master, which I barely learned what that meant, but I'm so excited that she's going to share what that means with you guys a little bit more and help us understand how she can really take very complex challenges, simplify it, and get those idea monsters to be put in order and get to the finish line. So Tasha, welcome to the call. How are you doing today?
Doing really, really well. How are you, Brigham?
I'm so good. Thank you so much for being here. Let's first dive in. I want to actually understand a little bit more. How do you balance your creative side, because you're extremely creative, and this corporate, extremely organized person? They feel like you're like two Jekyll and Hyde type of people in the same body. And I'm so excited to hear how you live that to its fullest.
You know, it's interesting that you put it that way, because I have often wondered that myself, because it's, you picture someone who's creative and they're like this flighty, very whimsical, out in the clouds personality. And then you've got like the corporate lady who's organized, and I am both.
You are both. And that's awesome.
I'm one at home and one at work. And at work, at least I'm hopefully not too stringent, too strict. I am, I think, as a project manager goes, very flexible, because I do have a firm belief that when it comes to project management of multiple different personality types, that everybody gets into their career based off of a passion skill set that is their strength. And so when I look at a project and I look at the people that I work with, I say, what is your strength? Why do you like doing that? And then when I have a project that fits that skill set strength, I say, hey, would you like to take this on? And like 97% of the time, I get everyone's absolute best work, because they're like, oh yeah, I'm really good at that. And I know how to do it. I'm like, I know. That's why I handed it to you.
I paid attention to your skill set. Like, Excellent.
But yeah, so I am a Scrum Master professionally. I do project management across multiple different departments of different companies that I've worked for. I have worked at large multi-million-dollar companies. I've also worked at smaller companies where we took on clients that were getting from 0 to 1. So they were just starting their companies and they came to the place that I worked at, which at the time was a marketing agency. So they were getting their feet underneath them to understand their own identity and how do they get that communicated out to everybody. And when you're managing projects for people, this is probably one of the most valuable skill sets that I think anybody could learn, is because when I am a project manager, that means if you come to me with your idea, I am the person that makes it real. I'm the person that says, I understand what this kernel is. And in order to get from here to finish, I've got a plan and a path, and we can do that together. That's one of my beliefs of why I'm such a good project manager for every place that I go to, is because it's more than just saying, I'm going to check off boxes. I am the person that has to mind work how those even come about. So when it comes to an idea, people often get excited about this one idea. And then when they start to explore it, that idea is like, oh, if I want to do, I don't know, name a thing. I want to be an Olympic diver. Okay, well, I'm going to research that. That means I have to know how to do diving. Oh, it means I know I have to do stretches. It means I know how to hit the water without hurting myself. It means I have to spend the time to practice. It means that I have to make sure that I'm applying for different coaches. It means that I have to, you know what I mean? Any dream or any kind of project that you want to do, whether it's for yourself or for your business, it starts as a little idea that feels like, oh, I could do that. But the more you research into it, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
And it gets scarier and scarier. This is why this idea monster is such a fun topic for us, because sometimes it's kind of like that little gizmo from Gremlins. You get him wet and he like turns into these scary beasts. Every single time you have an idea, you have to learn, do I want to tame this beast or do I want to get it out of my house?
Right. And so
You get to
people give up
choose.
on their dreams already because they're like,
Yeah.
there's just so much involved. But what I have found through something like as strict as Scrum Mastery, and for those who don't know what Scrum is a methodology that was developed back in the 1990s for a corporate environment, I think specifically around technical development for apps or for computers, where you take a very complex idea and say, how do we meet this objective? What are the things that we need? Okay, now take this idea and break it down even more, and then put it out into a calendar where every week we just do the little things to meet those minor goals until it adds up to this bigger goal. And that just takes dedication and time, because there are absolutely Scrum projects that could be months in the making. And to stick with something that long for a single objective can feel daunting.
Yeah.
And especially if you're doing it alone, especially if you do not have a network of people around you. And so a conversation Brigham and I had was making sure to have a network of people around you, because while those ideas get bigger and bigger and bigger, you're also researching all of the little unknowns in those basic ideas that got bigger and bigger. Well, I don't know how to do Facebook ads. Well, I don't know how to reach out to people and ask for an interview. I don't know how to do a sponsorship from a business. I don't know how to edit anything on YouTube. But that's why if you connect with people, you are able to say, well, what are other skill sets that I could offer to you that we could do in trade? Or what are things that I could provide that they could then in turn help me? And you build your own tribe of a network of people. The more people you get involved, the easier your projects are going to start to feel, because you've got a resource that you can go to ask a question. And so, at least for me, I have the luxury of that in my own corporate environment, because that's why everybody got hired. They're all the talent that I need to go ask a question. And if they're not the talent, then the internet, I'm sure I could Google something. But but when you're alone, it's difficult to say, I've got an idea, but it gets bigger. How do I do it? I think a big key of that is also finding other people in your space who are going through the same thing. And you don't have to do anything crazy. You could go to a Facebook group and apply for it. So like if you wanted to be a YouTuber, I've joined many small YouTuber community Facebook groups where I say, I don't understand this piece. Maybe somebody answers, maybe they don't. Maybe I go find something. But then I could even be a person where someone could come to me to say, hey, I saw what you did. I liked it. How do you do that? So even something like as small as just finding Facebook groups could be a huge way of taking this small idea that's getting bigger and feeling too intimidating as a monster to then tackle it in some way, at least one piece that you could do.
Tasha, you bring up a great point. As your idea starts to grow, this is one of the things that has been plaguing me for a little while. I've got a book that I'm writing right now. And when I first started, it was like, this is a small idea. It's a kind of simple thing. I'm just going to help people be able to put theater into their speech. I'm going to be able to direct it in a way that I'm a director for speeches. And then I was like, oh, this is a lot bigger than I thought it was. And I start doing a little bit of research and I start thinking about things. I was like, this week I wrote 27 pages of my book. And I was like, I'm like barely scratching the surface here of the experience that I have that I want to fit in here. So it's like, this is going to be a lot longer book and a lot bigger project than I originally thought. But the fact is that I started it. And a lot of times people have these ideas and they don't read the books. They don't do the research. They don't think back through their own experiences. They don't story mine is one of the things I like to say on my podcast, where they go back through their recesses of their mind, through their photos, through their videos, their experience, and say, what are the experiences that fit here from my own lived experience that I can gestalt or say, this is how I see this part of the world, how I have experienced this. All of those things are resources for you. They happen for you, not just to you. And one of the things that popped into my head, you know how Henry Ford was put on trial for being like an idiot, basically didn't know how to manufacture a car. Have you heard this story before?
I have not.
Okay, I'm going to tell you this basic story. He was put on trial and basically chastised because he did not understand how to build the vehicles that he was putting out. And while on trial, they asked him, they're like, well, how do you do this? How do you put that chassis? He's like, all right, I know exactly how. He's like, give me my phone. And he called the professional. He's like, all right, this is how. And he gave the phone to the judge. Okay, perfect. And then they're like, well, how do you do this with the tires? He's like, perfect. I know exactly who to call. And he got it. This is how. And it wasn't that he had all the knowledge. It was he knew where to find it. And that's kind of what I hear from you is you don't have to be the one that has all the talent.
No.
You just have to be willing and have the drive to figure out when you don't have that answer, who's going to most likely have that and where's the talent at? Because if it's not your talent, it's not your skill set, somebody is going to have it and they're probably going to enjoy it. And that's why they're doing their jobs because they love doing those things. And you might absolutely hate that part. So you're like, I'm going to delegate the things I don't like and I'm not good at to the people that love that part of this project. So let's talk about delegation a little bit for you, unless you have another idea. Go ahead.
No. Let's keep going down delegation, and then I'll touch on the other subject I had in mind.
Perfect. So have you ever read the 4-Hour Workweek or heard of this idea?
I know of it. I haven't read it. I think I've got a book. I just haven't read it.
It's basically delegating until you don't have to do all the things you don't want to. But how does that experience of delegation work in your line of business, and how have you applied that to your podcast?
It's never a hot potato, not doing anything anymore.
Yeah.
No such thing. When you delegate, it is not a, guess it's your problem now. It's a, okay, so delegation to me as a project manager is if I go to talent A and I say, hey, you're really good at this thing. Can you give me your feedback on what it is? It's not me saying, this is your problem. This is me saying, okay, I understand that this is something I believe you can solve. You need to give me input if it is. Because my job as a manager is to remove the obstacles that prevent them from going as far as they want into success. So when it comes to delegation, you're not looking for someone to just throw it over your shoulder. You're looking for someone where you say, okay, this is something that you can handle, and make sure that they never feel abandoned by that. Especially when it comes to building pieces, it's more than just giving someone a good pat on the back of like, you did a good job. It's making sure that they understand that they are trusted in their decision making for delegation. Delegating also means that you are still the thread of responsibility to understand how those things add up, because if you just disparate out and then never follow back up, they will just remain these disparate threads. There's no one to actually bring it back to. At least that's my experience as a project manager in the way that I like to run things. But I think my director really likes it because it really gets back to him because I'm the one holding all the tethers. So
I think that's excellent. You're giving out the responsibility or the role to figure out, hey, give me feedback on that. But then it's almost like you're reeling it back in. You're like, hey, did I get a fish? Oh, that was a crappy fish. Let's do it again. It's a random little example, but that might be a way you can think about it. I would love to hear your take. We're going to shift to the creative side now for just a moment. I want to hear your take on storytelling. I want to hear how you've been able to encapsulate your experience and be able to tell the very best stories possible.
Oh man. Well, that's a biggie.
That's a big question.
Yeah. So my name is Tasha Wheelhouse, my maiden name was Tasha Hickman. So my parents are Tracy and Laura Hickman. They're both fantasy fiction authors, very well known, especially in the 80s and 90s for a book series called Dragonlance. So all growing up for me, I grew up in a household with 2 full-time fantasy fiction writers where that was their entire career. They had like the classic contracts with publishers, the whole 9 yards, being on New York Times bestseller list. So for me, whenever I was a kid, we would like analyze my children's storybooks sometimes. Or we would talk about the monomyth at the kitchen table. The monomyth being this common cycle since old Grecian times of what is
a hero's journey, basically, is the way people talk about it. Yeah.
And Joseph Campbell, who published a book in the 1950s, wrote about this monomyth of having every cycle of every character ever and how you change over time. And even when it comes to something simpler that isn't necessarily the monomyth, there's also a different storytelling technique that my dad loved to implement that I grew up with called dramatica theory. So dramatic theory has to do with how you are looking at your characters' motivations that build into the master story of what's happening. And often, like those characters, they either fail or they win, or they have very specific time locks or option locks of problems hitting in their story, how they are intersecting with the world problem. Because most characters, their entire existence is not to serve the master of the story, like the big overarching problem. It's to solve their own problems, which sometimes in turn can solve the global problem happening around them in the story. So like if you do something as simple as Marty McFly from Back to the Future, right? In the very beginning, he lives in a poor neighborhood. His dad's a wimp. He's not really being taken seriously for his music. And yet he goes through this entire journey where he crosses the threshold of going into the past and intersecting with the past. And when he comes back, he himself has changed because he's got a completely different appreciation for who his parents were. He has affected the past in a way where they get to make different decisions as well. So by the time they hit the future, everything's changed again. There are simple stories that have the monomyth in it that I see in everyday storytelling, even for our own things. And when it comes to hitting trial and tribulation in our own lives, I often wonder if that is our way of hitting that threshold, going into a new experience that we've never had before, that sucks, that's hard, that I have to figure it out before I get back to home. And so that's what I look at when it comes to storytelling as a central part of who we are as people, is because we tell ourselves stories all the time. I am XYZ. I do ABC. I hate, LMN. I'm trying to find pieces of the alphabet now.
Just like alphabet soup. That's perfect.
Exactly. But yeah.
When I hear just focus on the monomyth, there's so many different things that come to mind. Harry Potter is probably the easiest example, but
yeah.
Star Wars, you've got so many different epic movies, epic stories that they follow this model because it just flat out works really well. What have you found as far as doing your Foley artist and all of the different elements in your podcast, those features, to make sure that you're building continuity? Because it's one thing to follow steps, but that can still feel really stilted. I've seen poor execution of that. Sounds like you've been doing this long enough that you've been able to overcome and polish a lot of those processes.
So yeah, you've got strict structure like we were talking about, but when it comes to how I present what it is that I create, I think about the emotion I want someone to feel, especially if it comes to something where it's horror or fear or anything of that nature. It's easy in the podcast that I do, Copper Shock Horror, where the way that I tell it in a first person is meant for you as the audience member to step into the shoe of the person describing what's happening to them, hearing the things around them, the creak of someone's footstep just outside the door, the idea that you could feel a breath on your neck, and what that loneliness could feel like for you as you were hearing that experience from somebody. And when it comes to writing a book or even a song, like there are people that write songs specifically to elicit a very specific emotion. Sometimes that's anger of wanting to just scream. Sometimes it's having something gentle and soft like a lullaby to go to sleep. There are things that you create that are meant to evoke a human response that I think is important to target with whatever it is that you're creating. And the only way that you can do that, to me, is to understand how you feel those things and elicit those feelings. One of the best pieces of writing advice I've ever received was at a Comic-Con where we were at a horror writing panel of a bunch of authors. To be honest, I can't even remember their names. But when I went up to the mic to ask, like, what can I do to not alienate my audience in horror? Because horror is like just a bookshelf of stuff. Like you've got aliens, you've got vampires, you've got slashers and stalkers. Those are not the same thing. And so when I say I'm a horror writer, what could that possibly mean for my audience? And how could anybody find me in that cacophony of different ideas and stories? And the guy sighed and he said, honestly, just write what scares you, because I guarantee you're not the only person who's afraid of that thing. that you're not the only person who's experienced that fear, and that those people will find you because they resonate and they respond to those things as well. So when you were telling those stories, to always write where you personally respond to those things. And it's funny how that does translate into business. I heard, or I was watching Instagram, and there was some blonde Russian model. I can't remember her name, but she said the best business advice she ever got from Sir Richard. Oh, he owns
Brunson?
Virgin. Yeah.
Yeah, I got you.
He said, find an industry that pisses you off, and then you use that to make it better. And so I often wonder about the ventures that he goes into, because personally, I love Virgin Voyages cruising, and it's completely different from anything that had been offered before they launched any of their boats. And so what this model did is, she said that it made her angry that in Hollywood films that there was the blonde Russian guy and he was always the bad guy. So she wrote her own Hollywood script and filmed it, of just flipping that on its head. But it's just an interesting idea to think, find the emotion that's going to elicit that human response and use it.
Beautiful. What scares you? What makes you elated, happy? Those human experiences. I think that's where storytelling is so impactful
Mm-hmm.
in business and in anything you do. Because if you don't have those emotional connections, people don't buy off of they don't buy off of logic, they buy off emotion.
Yeah, they
And
do.
if you don't have a transaction in that way, there's not going to be a long-term relationship. They might buy a stick of gum from you if that's what you're selling, but that's a commodity. It's not the same as having a loyal connection for a long time. So in the last few moments we have together, I would love to hear, what is one of the best life lessons you've learned from doing speaking, from being able to get your voice out there and share your experience, how you've monetized your experience, anything in that realm that you think would be able to help a new speaker be able to either get on stages or monetize their message?
It's interesting. I had difficulty monetizing my message for the longest time because I thought, well, it's easy for me to create this stuff out of thin air, or it's easy for me to organize everybody else's thoughts, right? Like, I was actually very much discounting what it was that I did as a talent. And that is a big life lesson. Do not discount the fact that you have a talent in something. It might feel like breathing to you, but for someone else, it's like pulling teeth. And so, what you can do is take that piece of what is valuable and leverage that to say, okay, this is how I bring value, this is what I do, and be strong in that thought behind it. Like, it did take me a while, in full transparency, it took me a while to be like, I like horror, I like telling horror stories, I'm really good at it, I really enjoy this thing, because I would tell myself, well, who's interested in campfire stories? But that was also at the same time discounting me as a person, because I like campfire stories.
Yeah.
I am the kind of person that listens to those things as a bedtime story as an adult. And I guarantee that there are other people like that out there, where I have listened to YouTube videos that would tell horror stories as I go to sleep because I felt lonely at the time. And so you can find good value behind what you create by understanding what it is that you do, and not discounting what you do, of writing off of, oh, well, that's not valuable. Yes, it is. Stop telling yourself it's not. Stop telling yourself I do thing and no, it's bad. It's poison. Don't do that to yourself, and begin to tell yourself why it's important, not why it's not.
That's a great piece of advice and encouragement. Finding the things that not only you value, but potentially other people do too.
Mhm.
I talked about the principle of, it's called the platinum rule. Have you ever heard this before?
Tell me.
Okay. So the golden rule, most people know, like, I'm going to do unto others the way that I want done unto me. Like, great. That's the golden rule. But I think there's another level to that. Do unto others the way they want to be treated.
Mm.
And if you think about the way your audience experiences things, and the more intimately you can understand your audience, their fears, their desires, their pains, their pleasures, the exciting things that get them going in life and business and speaking, the better you understand them and the more connections you can make with them, especially through storytelling, the more impact you can have when you share a great story, when you share your message.
Mm-hmm.
Just like what you said, Tasha, sometimes you share a story because you know it has emotional resonance for you. It scares you. So you're like, I think this might have somebody else feel the same things as me.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way you know is by sharing it. The only way you know if your story is relevant and valuable is by actually opening your mouth and doing it. Sometimes people, they discount their story or they discount their value because they don't think their message matters. I can tell you right now, guys, your message matters. And you have an amazing story, but sometimes we don't get to hear it because we just stop ourselves before we allow those amazing experiences and stories to come out. So I have a challenge for everybody. Go out there today in the next 10 minutes, literally pause this right at the end and go find a point in your life, a story that you've thought would be really helpful, and actually write it down. If you're not good at writing, hit record on your phone and just talk into it. Literally can be that simple. And share it with somebody. Doesn't have to be on social media. You can just share that story with a friend, a family member, but find a way to take your story and start documenting it. This is something that I found so much value in, and it is the start, not the finish of that story, because everyone has a crappy first draft of whatever it is that you do. It's okay to be crappy in the beginning, but it doesn't stay that way. Keep making those moves and make the vignettes of your life meaningful by sharing them with people. Tasha, before we sign off, is there anything else that you wanted to share?
Well, playing off of what you just said, which is your first draft is exactly what you wanted to say, but your final draft is the best way to say
it. Beautiful. That's awesome. Okay, cherry on top. Done. So good. Thank you so much. Guys, keep living up your life. Hit the like and subscribe button, by the way, because it helps. Leave a review if you like this. If you didn't like it, sorry. We did our best to give you great value. So thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. See you guys.